Hello, I'm William Calvin. I'm a professor at the University of Washington in Seattle. This is the second in a series of lectures on human evolution, covering this time the period between 2.3 million years ago and when our species first appeared about 200,000 years ago. This period is when the brain enlarged 3.3 times, social complexity and language developed, and our ancestors spread from Africa's tropics into Asia starting at 1.8 million years ago. Last time we covered great apes are almost us. This time it's the lifestyle that led to humans. Then we'll go next time into boom and bust, producing an amplifying feedback loop. Then we'll move on to our kind of language, and in particular our kind of looking ahead. It gives rise to creativity and to serious planning. These lectures are in aid of helping me write a book called Up from the Apes and Down Again. This depiction of the cover is because the theme of the book closely follows Gauguin's famous questions. They're seen in the little marginalia up in the corners, and translated it reads, where did we come from? What are we? Where are we going? We covered last time the properties of the great apes, and we covered a little bit of the beginning of hominids, the upright posture phase, which, if you remember, looks something like this. Most bipedal animals shift their weight from left to right, perhaps waddling as the hips rotate left and right. Humans are unusual in that a walking stride is a controlled fall forward, catching yourself with a free leg. The momentum from the fall is what then carries the body forward to being a top foot. You don't pull yourself forward or raise yourself back up this small lost distance. You just utilize the velocity from falling forward. You might call the stance the lambda stance, but I rather prefer to call it the Giacometti stride. So what else do we have that the great apes are lacking? Well, one is imitation. So innovations do not die with the inventor. The orangutan is the only one of the four great apes, as we discussed last time, that shows much sign of imitation, and some individuals are actually quite good at it. But in general, our closest relatives aren't very good at imitation. Secondly, our social life is much more complex, and we have things like language, so that you can say who did what to whom with what means in gossip. Creativity, we have some look-ahead abilities, and the creativity is so good that we can make plans and get it right the first time, something we've never done before. Toolmaking, which we're going to cover in this lecture. Grazer's meat added to the usual diet. And, of course, bigger brains, which we'll cover mostly next time. Other trends ascribed to the period between 2.5 million years ago and the agricultural era of the last 10,000 years. Childhood has been extended by a factor of 2, as has the generation time period between generations. Food preparation, pounding, soaking, cooking, such things. A shortening of the interval between births for a mother, from 6 down to 4, and then with agriculture down to 2 years. Mothers are now provisioned, and this might have something to do with concealed ovulation. That is to say, there's no signal announcing ovulation as in estrus behaviors in the apes. Even the woman herself often doesn't know when she is fertile. That means you must have much more frequent intercourse to succeed, and it probably was one of the things that promoted pair bonding. So here are some of the famous Australopithecines. The Tong child, discovered in a quarry in South Africa near Johannesburg. You can see it's a juvenile. Its skull is barely bigger than the palm of a hand. That's the late Philip Tobias demonstrating it to me in Johannesburg. His predecessor identified it in 1924, but a few other experts agreed that it was real, a potential human ancestor. They thought it was an ape. The skull was even left behind once in a London taxi cab, though fortunately the cabbie managed to track his passenger down and return it. The other famous find was that of Don Johansson's team in 1974. Nicknamed Lucy, it showed us what much of the rest of a Australopithecine looked like. This is a closer up view of the original Lucy bones. These are not the ones on display in the museum for the school kids. Lucy's age, now estimated at 3.3 million years, is also about the time when, at other fossil sites, there is evidence of cutting tools. Animal bones scored by a sharp cutting edge, presumably during butchery. The presumed tool-making technique back then is what I call smash and select. You basically take a cobble, you toss it up into the air or throw it against a rock face and try to shatter it. You sometimes get sharp edges out of this. And by holding cobbles in both hands, using one of them to pound the other, you can knock off flakes that are also sharp. So there's now a sharp edge in the cobble and a sharp edge in the smaller piece. These now can be used to get through skin, amputate limbs, and carry them away from the other scavengers. I call this the Glenn Isaac technique, from whom I learned it. You bash randomly without much design, and then select the pieces that have sharp edges. This is Louis Leakey, demonstrating use of the broken stone edge for butchering, about 1970. But the important use is for getting through the skin and for opening up joints. Blunt dissection suffices for butchery. Louis and Murray Leakey, both after finding stone tools at Olduvai Gorge, dug there to discover early Homo and Australopithecines. This is their granddaughter, Louise Leakey, at Olduvai, describing recent finds. Some of the famous fossil sites are just below her here. Next comes the misnamed Acheulean hand axe, seen here on top and side views. I'll come back to it. Its unusual shape after I describe its logical successor, the prepared platform for shoring off sharp blades of some length. To start, go back to smashing two cobbles together until you can get a half cobble with a fairly flat split surface. Then you try to shave off a blade from the cliffs. Hitting the top edge with another stone works, but it results in small, sharp flakes instead of the single-edged razor blades that you can get by spreading out the stone's impact along a straight line using a pusher stick. You can make one from shattered ostrich egg shells, quite common in the Rift Valley, as are ostriches, often with straight edges from where they cracked. This found object's straight edge can be used as a pusher stick, so the blow's force is spread out fairly evenly. There's the action. That's a real piece of ostrich egg shell that I have on my shelf. So you prepare it by splitting, and then you shave off an edge. It pretty well results in a blade factory, as say you can just sit there doing this over and over until you use up the raw material. And none of the other things like the stuff in the middle, the Achillean hand axe, is anywhere that efficient. You might ask what's missing from the story of early tools. And what's missing is tools made of bone. At any campsite, bones are found, very common, even more than ostrich eggs. Most rocks can serve to sand bone down into points. Yet, tools made of bone are not seen until halfway through Homo sapiens times. So I don't know the reason for this. It may have been that imitation was still insufficient to spread to practice culturally. That is to say, it may have been invented, but it died with the inventor. Besides the late use of bone for tools, the other oddity about tool making is it seems to be all about sort of proto-scalpels and the efficiencies in making them. Furthermore, there are 1.3 million year-long periods of stasis in technique, distance between those eras. There are not gradual improvements along the way that were widely imitated. One of the important ideas in human evolution, going back to Darwin, is that more complex tool use was what required bigger and bigger brains. But that's backward, given the emerging facts. Major advances in tools are steps. Those orange arrows So much for the how of making sharp edges. Let us reset the when time back to 2.5 million years. That's the start of the ice ages, where snow turns to ice, building up on land and mountains. So water doesn't return to the oceans right away, and sea level keeps falling because of the continuing evaporations. There's, of course, a lot of back and forth in climate, producing boom and bust for lots of species, and particularly for grazers and their hominid predators, which have even additional sources of fluctuation. Okay, here is the Rift Valley, and certainly by 2.5 million years, it was largely grasslands in the bottom of this valley and its sides, all the way from the Serengeti and even further south, all the way up through Kenya and Ethiopia to the Afar Triangle there, which includes some Eritrea and Djibouti. So that means that there is both grass and water for grazing herds. Now, with the ice ages, sea level goes down, exposing the Red Sea continental shelf, which has springs that can create oases for the grazing animals. So they too can now expand northward up the Red Sea shoreline, as can their predators. At 2.4 million years, something interesting happens. The grass eaters become specialized into grazers. There can be mixed feeders that eat both leaves and grass. There can be browser onlys that forego the grass in favor of leaves that have a lot of water in them. But an interesting effect at 2.4 million years is that you get grazing animals that are susceptible to an interesting kind of boom and bust feedback loop, which I will come to mostly the next time. And right at that time where the grazing animals evolve, at least in western Ghana, North Kenya, this is the time when the brain size starts its trip up to triple. Homo erectus, and the first out of Africa, all the way halfway up to the Arctic, has occurred before 1.8 million years. Homo erectus's brain size manages to double over the Stratoceans at 1.4 million years. Homo erectus is pretty modern below the waist, and Homo erectus has a shoulder that has already been adapted for throwing. And of course, they make these Acheulean-style tools, which are a combination of both a serrated edged knife and a source for sharp flakes. So it is at this time, 1.8 million years, that there's a substantial spread north out of the tropics of Africa and out into Eurasia. By 1.77 million years, they're at Dmanisi up here in Georgia. And very shortly thereafter, they are in China and all the way down into Java. Let me say a few brief words about what makes for the winds that deliver water off of the Indian Ocean. North and south of the equator, the ocean, the atmospheric circulation differs quite a lot. Near the equator, you have the trade winds that come out of the east. They come out of the northeast and converge on the equator. And if you're in the southern hemisphere, they come up out of the southeast and converge at the equator, or tens of degrees, sometimes either side. The winds that come off the Indian Ocean are therefore delivering water inland into the Rift Valley. The deserts that you get are because the air that rises in the hot tropics, which tends to be saturated with water vapor very often as it comes off the ocean, this air heated up is rising, just like in monsoon circulation. But it loses, as it cools going up, it starts losing the water that it contains. It falls out as rain. So by the time this rising air reaches the stratosphere, it's pretty dry. Now, where does it come back down? Among the places are about 25 degrees north and south of the equator. You get the Sahara up in the north, the Kalahari and the mid-deserts down in the south, but again with this sort of wettish band all along the eastern shoreline because of trade winds. What happens after this period where the air that rose comes down over the Sahara and is dry. And if there's no other source of water like monsoon circulation, which doesn't work very well up in the Sahara at the moment, it gets to be pretty dry. Now, 8,000 years ago, and many other occasions in the past, there was enough monsoon in the Sahara to grow grass. And there are hominid archaeological sites from 40,000 years ago up in the middle of the Sahara. There were obviously ponds, there were elephants and grazing animals and lions and so forth, all through the Sahara. Same thing down here in the south. It too has changed with climate. Okay, so here's what the Rift Valley often looks like. This is on the eastern escarpment of the rift, where the road north from Nairobi goes on up to Lake Naivasha and points north. And far across the valley, you can see the western escarpment. So here's a view from space showing the probable path that was taken by Homo erectus at about 1.8 billion years. It's a 6,000 kilometer long path, halfway to the North Pole after all, and just from following grazing animals is the suspicion. Now, how does the Rift Valley come about? Basically, it's sort of hot under the Rift Valley, causing the molten metals down there to expand and dome up, the earth on top of it. This causes cracks in the surface. A couple of parallel cracks will enable the land between them to drop down into the gap that's being produced. It may fall several times, as shown here. So this is what makes for the Rift Valley. It's also the source of the Red Sea, as we'll see in a minute. This is looking across the Rift Valley from the Addis Ababa airport, and it's sort of like looking across the Grand Canyon. Okay, once the Rift Valley hits the Red Sea, the spreading center continues all the way up the Red Sea. That's what produced the Red Sea, is one of these drop-down faults, which went below sea level and got filled up by salt water. Here you can see the Nile over here on the left, going north. The blue line on the horizon here is about where the Mediterranean is, and you can see the Sinai Peninsula here, with one side of it going up to the Dead Sea and the other side going up the Suez Canal. Okay, this is, again, the satellite view from up at the north end. So here's the spreading center fault line in the middle here, coming up the Red Sea, and it jogs up the Gulf of Aqaba, known to the Israelis as the Gulf of Eilat, both named after the towns that are right at the head of the Gulf here. That Rift Valley goes all the way up to the Dead Sea, goes through it up to the Sea of Galilee, goes past it up into the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon and further north. The picture on the left shows you a model of the elevations around there. So you see the Dead Sea, which you see is broken into two halves, because the water level is being getting lower and lower as more water is captured through irrigation. Now, I have stretched a dashed line between Jerusalem over there on the west and this big wadi over here in Jordan. And on the picture at the right, a picture taken from Jerusalem looking east of Jordan, you can see just what a deep ditch it is. I mean, it's 1,400 feet below sea level. Jerusalem itself is at about 3,000 feet. It's in the Snoqualmie Pass. So it is indeed a deep trench. So these valleys continue up to the Bekaa Valley into Turkey and then on up to Georgia, near where the European plate collides with the Asian plate. Homo erectus was found at Dmanisi as early as 1.77 million years ago. That circle is where the next scene is located. This is the dig at Dmanisi with a summer's worth of students learning archaeology, helping out. That's the museum building over there on the top left. And there's a giant canopy covering this whole site, something that African archaeologists would have loved to have had. These are among the 5 skulls found so far from Homo erectus, all dated at about 1.77 million years ago. So much for what and where. How did they make a living that took them so far away from tropical fruit trees and the big leaves? The short answer is meat. Back in the tropics, there are important alternatives to meat from gathering, but regularly eating meat is what took them out of Africa and around the world. So the methods for meat are, evolutionary speaking, something like this. There's a baseline of monkey-style snatch and grab of not only eggs, but the defenseless young of other species that sort of hide in the grass. And a great many primate species do this. When you get to apes, you see some army patrol style tactics involved, added on to snatch and grab. And woodland hominids are thought to add power scavenging. This requires intimidating the original hunters at a kill site, the lions, the hyenas, etc., intimidating them so that they let you take away their kill. Here's one of the techniques, mostly suitable for small packages of meat. Long sticks serve to club small animals in the undergrowth. The original action at a distance. The animals had never, in evolution, been subjected to predation, comes whistling down from above, where they would tend to freeze and therefore get clubbed. So our frontier-capable ancestors might have been able to deal with lions via mobbing tactics when scavenging the carcass. Something the way that the hyenas would try to take away a kill from lions. However, meat in large packages is another matter. I'm going to show you a movie of this in a minute. But for now, just note those long sticks the 3 guys are carrying. These are about 6 feet long. I'd say 8 feet is a distance that you find in one of the other tribes that still does a lot of hunting, carrying long poles around. These are even handy, I think, to fend off lions that get too close to you. In other words, if one of the lions should come up towards these guys, two of them can poke in this direction, which, again, evolution did not exactly prepare lions for. And a third can always, whistle down that pole on top of the lion's head, promoting, if not serious injury, promoting retreat. Lions, big cats, are fairly cautious in situations that they haven't encountered before. So you can see that scavenging here can start by just taking the leftovers, the ones that the lions and those fierce hyenas leave behind. Unfortunately, this is a very poor yield, and it's likely to be contaminated, so it's infectious. Or you can advance to power scavenging, taking the kill away, and trouble is with that is the lions tend to follow you home, following their dinner that's disappearing. Third choice is to amputate a hind limb quickly and carry it away, leaving the belly behind. Lions love the fat in the abdomen. But this means the lions return to the kill and they don't follow you home. So is this amputation why hominids needed sharp edges back at 3.3 million years? I think so. For decades, I have been suggesting that our hominid ancestors could have mobbed the lions in possession of a carcass, so they retreated to a safe distance. Then the object is not to steal the carcass, but just quickly amputate one limb. The lions will still be there, not very far away in a circle, waiting to come back into their kill. So you get meat this way, and furthermore, it's meat that's not yet contaminated by the lions rummaging around in the belly. So if you don't have a steel machete like those guys, how do you detach hind limb? Throw a cobble against another rock until it splits. Smash it again until you can select some sharp plates from the debris. A found object, no less. Smash and select. Even a bonobo can manage this with a little teaching, using a sharp plate to cut a rope to open the box containing the banana. Our ancestors, however, could use it to amputate a hind limb, with lions as an eager audience. You can improve on this found object by smashing selectively, aiming your blows near edges. There is a high failure rate. You may waste a lot of raw material, but occasionally you will get something like a knife edge. But don't think of using it like a surgeon's scalpel. It will become dull in a single stroke. I can suggest an alternative from my limited experience as a surgeon. Here is what I imagine is the beginner's method. Make a hole in the skin if the lion hasn't done so, and attempt a brute force rip of the skin. Here's where you need a couple of surgical assistants, each of them to grip a fold of skin and haul back to try to widen the hole. You nick away at the exposed rip edge, as when opening up a seam and sewing. This nick-assisted rip requires very little sharp edge, minimizes both wear and the grip pressure needed. It's an obvious use for what the archaeologists call a sharp flake. The major problem with using small flakes is that pinch grip. With such a delicate teacup kind of grip, you cannot do a long straight incision as a surgeon would do with a scalpel blade. And even if you could, your sharp edge would be dull after the first inch. Using it to nick away, however, is compatible with a pinch grip. There is a way to get lots of sharp flakes, and as a byproduct, a serrated knife edge, as this animation shows. Serrated edges involve pushing on a ledge in the rock to shear off a flake. You get small sharp flakes for that nick-assisted grip. And you get some long serrated edges as the byproduct. This serrated knife edge could be used even more profitably in that nick-assisted grip. If you're doing edges like this and they're not perfectly parallel, they will eventually intersect. And that may be the reason for the pseudo point in the so-called hand axe. This hand axe is basically a core for flakes, and in addition, it's awfully handy as a serrated edge knife. I think it's also handy for throwing at animals packed together in herds to injure one, but we'll save that for another day. So you first see the soft hammer technique. I've been talking about hard hammer so far, stone striking on stone just at a point on the stone surface, not distributed along an edge. But you first see the soft hammer technique with the Chilean cores. The advanced blades requires only splitting a cobble to yield a flat platform and then shaving off vertically. The pusher is either a stick or, even better, since you want a really straight edge, you can pick up straight edges from cracked ostrich egg shells, which are scattered all over the savanna, there being a plentitude of ostriches. And then you hammer on top of it like this. So this serves to shove a whole region of cliff edge off, and you get some very good blades, upper right corner, out of this. The pusher spreads out the impact over some width, sort of like you have a whole line of people standing on a cliff edge and jumping together at the same time. Now, for all this, let me say that sharp edges are not essential. That is to say, butchery can be done with brute force, pulling in opposite directions to rip open skin and seams. Blunt dissection serves to open up seams between muscles. The blunt end of a scalpel blade is often used by modern surgeons to do this kind of work in seams. You stick a finger in and try to slide it along. Even joint ligaments can be ruptured with enough force. So you can't say that sharp is really essential for many of the things, but there are situations that make a sharp edge pretty much essential if you need to be quick about it. In order to amputate a limb while the lion's watching patiently, quicker is better. Sharp speeds up skin incision. Sharp speeds up exposing the hip joint. Sharp speeds up cutting through the joint ligaments. Shattered rock edges will dull quickly, and so it's best to bring flakes or a serrated edge along. So that's how I view the essential methods for acquiring meat from the large herbivores that lions kill. Now we need to discuss the landscape and some aspects of how it provides a perfect setup for causing evolution to speed up, with processes rather akin to the compounding of interest. The environmental backdrop to hominid evolution includes these kinds of landscapes. The picture here is from the Serengeti, or more properly Kenya's edge of it called the savanna. You can see in this picture a gallery forest. You see that stream in the middle ground going through. And so the trees are clustering in an area where they can reach down to get enough water. You can see some woodland in the foreground that's a mixed grass and trees. It's also following a stream. It's an underground stream in this case. Elephants can hear them where there's turbulence, and they tend to burrow with their feet, dig down to try to get a mud bath, and if they keep going, they'll get a water hole. The Maasai dairy farmers love them, elephants, just because they will produce water holes for their cattle. See, grassland, savanna, properly speaking, is grassland with scattered trees. Brush not shown here, I'll show you in a minute. Now, the reason you get one kind of vegetation and not another can be seen in the process of forest succession. Initially, after a fire, for example, you will get some grasses. If there's not enough underground water in the dry season for anything except grass, then grass is all you'll get. You may get volunteers of leafy plants in the middle of the grass, but if they can't reach down to enough water to do all that leaf style evaporation, then they'll die out during the dry season. So it sort of goes grasses, shrubs, short-lived pioneer trees, and then climax forests. And they mostly depend upon soil thickness to hold the water, but it depends, of course, on how porous the soil is. The fringe of a forest tends to be woodland, as grass intrudes into the drier areas of forest. As African forests fragmented 6 to 2 million years ago, more and more woodland became available because of the fragmentation of forests. Our ancestors specialized in woodland, and so they had a booming habitat for their population. This picture looks like it's all grass, but that herd of wildebeest tells you that there is water downhill of here. They have to visit a water hole at least every second day. Unlike browsers who get much of their water from eating water-filled leaves, water pulled up from below the ground. An area of bushes and shrubs tends to be called brush or scrub. There's many shady places for a lion to hide here, of course, for ambushes. Keep cool until the opportunity presents itself. Grazing animals do not tend to like brush very well because of that reason. Why an area of bushes and shrubs should be called brush or scrub, it always bothered me until I finally realized something. Perhaps these names are for the actions needed upon your return from a walk. That is to say, if you wear long pants, you brush them. If wearing British hiking shorts, you scrub your legs and sag. I mean, brush and scrub are verbs. Bush and shrub are nouns. So it took me 10 years at least to figure this out. Now you have the ecological basis to appreciate how our ancestors fit into the landscape 3.3 million years ago. But, there's no balance in nature. Climate changes all the time, but there's even more frequent events such as wildfires that transform forests and brush into grassland for a while. That creates a population boom for those herbivores that specialize in grass. They can't utilize the brush area very well unless they're mixed feeders going after leaves, because they're grass eaters only. They get a population boom whenever a brush fire occurs. And that means a boom for their predators, including our ancestors. So that's about the end of this lecture. We have covered lifestyle that led to humans. Next time comes the feedback loop that makes human boom and bust so interesting. We'll move on then to our kind of language and our kind of looking ahead, the creativity and planning that makes us able to do so many new things.